You just press play on the Last Breath Hunt Cast, home of the Huntroversy. We're here to entertain, educate, and engage. And in case you didn't know, you only live once. But if you do it right, once is enough. Don't waste it.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Last Breath Hunt Cast. This is Garrett Bolkus. Across from me is Grant Putnam.
Hello.
And you are listening to episode 162. Now, if you didn't catch the one before this, we are doing a little mini-series here during deer season. It's a little easier for us to record, and it's going to be season relevant. So we're going to take a short break away from the Huntroversies, which you guys have come to know and love. And we're going to talk about tactics that we use. We're going to try to drop them with relevancy to the season. So today we are revisiting a topic that we talk about every single fall, and that is scrape hunting. We've become better than some at this. We really enjoy hunting over scrapes, analyzing them, using them, and strategizing specific deer with scrapes. But before we get into that, we got to pay the bills. So we want to thank Badlands Gear. They make this podcast possible, and we have been using their stuff for how many seasons, Grant? 4 seasons now. And if you guys follow along, you know that they are really starting to take to the whitetail, the Midwest hunters. They're launching new gear, new garments, and new suits to be used in the Midwest, specifically for whitetail hunting. The Celine's jacket and pants was just recently launched. It is a great mid-season suit. It's going to be warm, but not quite as warm as a Pyre, incredibly quiet, and something that you should look at. And if you think, man, I'd like to wear this November, you can save yourself 30% by using our exclusive code with them, which is LASTBREATH22BL30, all caps, all one word, at the checkout. So when you add your stuff to your cart, you'll go to the checkout on the right-hand side. You'll see a bar for a coupon code. You can enter that there. It is important to note that this coupon code works on normal price items. Their sale or clearance items, they will not take that additional 30% off. Trust me, I wish they would, but they've already marked those down heavily. So this is just on normal price gear. Again, Last Breath 22BL30. Save you 30% out the checkout code. Another great sponsor of ours is Moultrie Mobile. We've got ours firing now. We're using them, and specifically talking about scrapes. We're going to be hanging them over those scrapes, whether they're mock scrapes or natural scrapes. We're using them to track our bucks on our property and hopefully seal the deal. Now, getting into this, Mr. Putton, we just said this before we went on air. One of our favorite things that we do. And gosh, we have killed a lot of deer
Using these methods.
I mean, scrapes are just so influential in the way that we hunt our farms, and the way that we target our deer, and the way that we specifically hunt for these deer. Even if we're not scrape hunting, you know, if you think back of the deer that we have hunted in the past, like more times than not, we have got a lot of images, a lot of data on who they are, what they are, where they live, how they act, what their demeanor is over scrapes.
Yeah, they are just a great site, especially for a non-bait using Midwestern state, to really get a buck on video, see what he is, and most importantly, see his demeanor, which we key in on a lot, like in early November with our decoy and our calling sequences and stuff like that. Like, we like knowing the personality of the buck, and I feel like in a Midwestern state, if you're using a scrape and you turn your camera on video mode for 15 to 20 seconds and that deer is just passively working it, just hoofing the ground and maybe taking a whiz, that's fine, but we're looking for those deer, and particularly that are, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old, that are really thumping the tree, really working the tree aggressively, beating the branches back and forth of the licking branch. And we're going to go into like how we can make that possible. I was talking to Garrett just about before this, and one of my bugaboos, and I think a pet peeve of mine, is when anybody says or gives the illusion that they're cocky. I always prefer myself to be around people that are more so listeners than talkers, and more so humble. But I do feel like all of the things that we're going to talk through today, it's been a good trial and error for us over the last 16 years. And if I had to hang our hat on one thing that I feel like it is the best category or subcategory of whitetail hunting tactics that we have, I think that this would be our number one tool that we're good at. You know, we're okay at decoy hunting. We're pretty darn good at this. In terms of food plot design and stuff like that, like there are a lot of people out there that are more intelligent than us when it comes to that. And when it comes to like hunting terrain, like a person like hunting in Pennsylvania or in Ohio would be much, much better than the two of us at doing that. But in ag country over scrape lines, I think that what we do in the system that we run is virtually foolproof if you do it the right way during the right time of the year. So I'm excited to talk about this one just because I feel like if you were to ask me questions about mobile hunting, I could give you like the 2 or 3 star out of 10 response, and I could get my way around a conversation with somebody like an Infault or maybe someone like that that's like a 10 out of 10, highly intelligent in that area. But I feel like we're solid at this, and we've gained just so much knowledge over trial and error on this that I'm excited to share like what we've learned. So getting into the first question, the scents and the products that we use by name, we've got it really, really dialed in, I feel. And we've been using these same 3 or 4 products for like the last 12 years that we've really been thumping this. And so let's go ahead and go over what the heck a scrape looks like first, and then we'll tell you about the products we use on each part of the scrape. So let's cover the ground first. Like when you and I are making a mock scrape, and we're going to talk about later in the podcast the difference between the scrape types that we've come to identify, but let's talk about how to build the best mock scrape first and go ahead and start with the ground.
Okay. So again, we're starting back at ground zero. There's probably not a lot of natural scrapes in the area yet. We try to make these in, early September through mid-October. Mm-hmm. There are mock scrapes, and it's important to understand the animal. Okay, so when you think about a deer, that's where it starts. Understand how tall a deer is. Understand what he's using with the scrape. And so most hunters, the biggest mistake that I think people make when making mock scrapes is they hang them too high. A lot of people are 5'8" to 6+, mm-hmm. and you have to think a deer is not that tall. A deer stands, like his eyes are probably somewhere around that 5-foot range. And a deer that's going to make a scrape on his own isn't going to want to stand on his hind legs and reach up for the licking branches. Do they do this? Yes. We've all seen the videos and the pictures of them doing it. But they also are able to approach those scrapes usually and be able to just pick their head up and get into them. So when you're hanging your scrape branch, or if you're picking a tree to make it under, make sure that it's at that chest height. And you know how tall you are in accordance to like a deer. Just make sure that you're not overhanging it. I know it's a lot easier to do your work, whether you're putting scents on it or you're hanging your sticks kind of above your head, mm-hmm. but just be conscious of that. That's the first thing. The second thing is understanding the tree that you're going to be putting this in. Deer use their noses, their faces, their eyes, all these scent glands on top of their heads, around their orbital, around their lips, or what they use to deposit scents to the licking branches. So thorny trees are not the very first choice for any of these bucks to be doing this. Mm-hmm. If you were to, have a fingerprint reader at work, and every time you did it shot a needle in your finger, you would not like doing that.
I would hate that.
So stay away from thorny trees. The next thing is also think about the type of tree that you're using as far as its aroma. So more trees are more aromatic than not. And if you think about, like, if you ever take a walnut tree and you take a leaf and you roll it in your fingers, it has a very strong scent. If you were to take even some of the other deciduous trees in the area and you were to roll it in your finger like a cedar or a pine tree, it'll have a very strong scent. And you have to think that kind of muddies the water to a buck's sensory glands, his olfactory glands, when he goes up there. So we have found that mulberry trees, cherry trees, specifically our absolute hands down favorite, white oak trees, are...
Most hardwood trees are pretty darn good other than your walnut.
Correct. I would say walnut, locust are very pungent as well. Hedge have a very strong aroma.
I hate hedge trees.
Yeah. So, think about that if you're picking a tree and you're not donning it with an auxiliary branch. And then lastly is the location. Any tree can become a scrape tree. Yes, we understand that. But Inside and outside corners are hot spots for us. They're high traffic areas. They're going to funnel deer to them. Field edges or food plot edges that are along maybe 10, 12 feet off of a deer path or an entrance or an exit to those field or food plots are really good. And then if you're doing something in the timber, make sure that it's along a heavily used trail. Deer are using them more than not to mark their territory, but then they continue to check them as who's in my turf, who's in my area. So you want to have them in traffic zones. And, you go through that. Height is important. The tree that you're hanging it on is important. And the location so that it's going to be used and seen and observed and easily accessible is also important. So let's get into we're constructing a mock scrape, Grant. You take us through the process because we just checked all the boxes on where and what.
So I feel like before we cover that, there are a few different types of things to consider. One is probably the largest scrape, and that's a community scrape. We do not tend to create community scrapes on our own. What we try to do is go in and make a scrape near to an existing scrape line that's going to upset a buck that he's going to try to then take over and pull into his range. And so when we are making scrapes physically on the ground, we typically bring it almost looks like a golf club. What do you call that? Like
the weed whip?
The weed whip. So we bring the weed whip with us in case we're in an area in the timber where there's a lot of vegetation on the floor to whip out of the direction of where we want to put the scrape. So we'll weed whip an area that's about 3 feet by 3 feet. Within that 3 feet by 3 feet area, we will then make our scrape, and that's going to be we're working up the ground typically with a rake until the point where the ground is muddy or the
dirt is exposed.
And that area will be like the size of an oversized pie plate. We're talking like 16 inches diameter max. So don't overdo it. These scrapes don't need to be monstrous. And like I said, we try not to create a community scrape, which is just a large scrape that... Sorry, Garrett made me drink an energy drink before this, and I'm burping.
Now he's going to crap his ass.
So a community scrape is one of those that's like the size of a dinner table that everybody has seen once or twice in their life, where there may be even multiple tree branches hanging down into the community scrape, but we're not talking about that. So once you've got your 16 inches of dirt in a circle or oval exposed, you got to think of a way of a deer pawing a ground. They're not going to make a perfect circle necessarily. They're going to make like an oval, kind of like a dog when it's trying to dig a hole. And once that's been exposed, we tend to try to pick the tree that's already there, and we'll try as hard as we can to hang it underneath like a white oak that's going to keep its leaves all year long, that's sitting about 3.5 or 4 feet the branch above the dirt that we expose. So once we've got that done, now we're going to go into actually what the heck we're putting on the ground to make the scrape. And this product in this category that we're about to say, if any other product sticks with you today, this is the one to go and purchase, because this is the one that's worked for us. Because we've tried Scream and Heat, we've tried like Tink 69, we've tried Scrape Fix, we've tried those Magnum scrape trippers, we've tried almost every product. We've tried scent beads that absorb scent that we dump on the ground. We've tried
those worked okay.
And those worked okay. We've tried deer urine, just straight up deer urine that's from even a live captive deer herd. And I think that's the second best option behind what we're about to say, which is Code Blue. It's a product called Grave Digger. You were the first one to buy this out of our whole group, and it was like 13 or 14 years ago before it came in the little can. It was like a vacuum sealed food saver bag, and it's just like dirt. It's just like loose potting soil that has a pea scent to it. So you sprinkle that on the scrape, and sometimes he and I we'll even take like the heel of the rake like on one side, and we'll dig down like a golf ball or baseball sized divot in the center of the scrape to pack in, like, think of a big old dude that loves dipping, right? He's gonna pack his big old wad of chaw right into one side of his lip. Well, we try to do that and get like a baseball sized divot right in the center of the scrape for that scent to be concentrated in, and then we'll sprinkle like we're putting seasoning on a pizza or something like that, or a steak on that perimeter of that scrape. So it's concentrated in the middle. Because when a buck steps up to a scrape and peas, he's not like spraying like a sprinkler all over the scrape. It's basically coming down off of his hocks, dripping onto the ground in pretty much the same spot, which is going to be towards the center. So that's what we do. And then we look up at the branch itself. going back to, we use Gravedigger by Code Blue. This is a product that you can purchase online at your Field & Stream, Bass Pro, wherever, typically, unless they run out, for around $8 or $9. So it's not a big deal, but we do use these, like, we ration it. Typically, when we start a scrape, we'll put an entire can out, and then from there, to freshen it, we'll use like a third or a half of a can to make us seem like we're trying to overtake a scrape line, which again, we'll speak about that in a second. So as we transition up to the branch, go ahead and take us through the couple products that we use on the branch itself, which are another couple great products.
I would say the most important thing that we use on the upper half of the scrape isn't a product you buy in the store, but one that you get from Mother Nature. And that's, we will clip white oak branches from field edges, roadways, parts of the farm that you're not going to use. It starts there. And boy, we've had tremendous amounts of luck with this. And so we'll get anywhere from a 2.5 to 4 foot section of white oak.
So if you ever see us during hunting season scampering in and out of our trucks really quick around the properties that we hunt with a pair of shears, that's what we're doing. Yeah. We're going into the ditch trying to pick out a juvenile oak tree
or just a branch,
to clip and a branch, clip that branch, and we'll take it with us hunting.
Yep. So the oak branches is number one, and we'll zip tie that to the tree, and that allows you to hang in a non-desirable tree, or to hang in a spot where the limbs maybe aren't low enough. More times than not, you have these corners or these pockets or these spots on a field where, the farmer went by and they clipped the branches too tall so they can get their planter under it. Well, you can fix these on, like I said, with a couple of zip ties and some rubber gloves, and now you've got that low-hanging branch that's
desirable.
Need. Correct.
And you could put them on a hedge tree as well. Like, let's cut through the mustard here. Many field edge type scenarios are not going to have these beautiful, towering, monstrous oaks growing in the fence row.
Yep.
It's going to be crappy, junky little trees that are 8 to 15 feet high that are typically going to be like a hedge sort of tree.
Right.
And so we will zip that right onto the hedge tree to give them a preferable branch.
Yep.
Go ahead.
So once you got that licking branch on there, number one. The next thing that we use, and this, again, is without endorsement. We just come to really like their products, is Rack Rub and Preorbital Gland. So another 2 products that are made by Code Blue. And these are things that a little goes a long way. A jar of Rack Rub and it's like a deodorant stick of this Preorbital Gland will last you all season. We've seen people make the mistake of really glopping it on the licking branches, and thinking back to a deer, when a deer deposits that scent onto the branch, it's a very minimal amount. So a little goes a long way. That Rack Rub, it comes in a jar, and it almost looks like a can of like PVC primer. If you think about that.
Yeah, a little OD can.
Yeah. So at the end you twist off the cap, there's a steel rod with a small piece of cotton that absorbs the scent. We'll usually run it around the top to get it, not so it's gooped on there, and just put a little bit on the branch. And then with the Preorbital Gland, again, that's like a deodorant stick style of scent. You can put that onto the branch, and you don't need to like try to grind it in, just rub it on, let that scent adhere to it. And I think you'll find that, like I said, a little bit goes a long way. You can always add more to it as you revisit the scrape, but if you just kick him in the face with a big fat scent smack, you might shy something off. So white oak branches, number one, with Rack Rub and Preorbital Gland on the licking branches. We throw the Gravedigger in the mock scrape, and we've hung mobile cameras on these mock scrapes, and within 90 minutes of us making them, we've had bucks in them.
Yep.
I mean, it's that quick. I mean, not every time, but darn sure within 48 hours you will have a deer visit that scrape. And if it's a dominant deer that you're knocking on his door, you'll find them either take it over or make a challenge scrape next door. So I think, speaking of challenge scrapes, now's a good time, Grant, for you to go over, like, we have found there's really 3 types of scrapes that we have. You covered community.
Yep.
And then I'm going to let you talk about territory/challenge scrapes, and then the dominant scrape. So these are our terms. We're not wildlife biologists, but boy, it sure makes a lot of sense the way that we break them down. So again, the community scrape is a scrape that a lot of deer visit, even does. They're huge, they're large, they're prolific, and if you see one on your property, key on that, because it's a very important piece of the puzzle.
Hang a camera over that.
But Grant's going to cover these other 2 that we call, and we kind of have a cross name, like a territory challenge scrape for one, and then we have a dominant scrape. And you, if you're a whitetail hunter and you're observant, you've seen these on your property, on places you hunt, and hopefully this helps you understand them a little bit better.
Yep. So one of the kinds that we've noticed is a dominance or a challenge scrape. We kind of use those words interchangeably. And what we try to do with these scrapes, these are scrapes that are kind of random. Like when you're going in during the season into your property, that you notice a scrape and it's kind of all alone in a spot that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
And it's not super developed.
It's not very developed. It may even have leaves covering it, as in it's been hit once or twice, and that's pretty much it, and was left dormant. So oftentimes this is like a scrape that even could be made in the middle of a field that's not a turkey scratch. And we've had deer that we've called in before where we've had multiple bucks come in, and if you've ever seen this, it's one of the coolest things I think we've ever witnessed about hunting. And it's happened quite a few times where we'll bring in a buck or two. If it's multiple bucks, they'll posture up to one another and they'll start hoofing the ground to show their dominance, and then they'll pee just a little bit out in that scrape. Then we have scenario 2 where we call and a deer doesn't identify a deer because we're not using our decoy yet or something like that. We didn't bring it with on that particular day for some reason, and they kind of are scanning the area and then they start hoofing the ground and pee. Well, a deer is going to do the same thing when their scrape line is being invaded, which is kind of the third type, as a scrape line / territory. Like a deer is physically carving out their territory, the perimeter of their core area in which they want to assert their dominance, and kind of fence off like an invisible fence. So a dominance or a challenge scrape, what we do is we identify a scrape line. We are identifying these edges, and we ourselves will take a new mock scrape and we'll make a dominance or a challenge scrape somewhere within that scrape line, whether it's on the end or somewhere in the middle of the line. Typically we call a line somewhere between like 3 and 6 or 7 scrapes. So we either pick a spot in the middle that we can hunt or on one end or the other and hunt. And we will put a scrape in close proximity. We're talking like 8 to 10 yards away from the existing scrape. Or closer. And we will spray or sprinkle a little bit of scent in the existing one, but then we'll put our big heap of scent in our new challenge / dominance scrape nearby to upset the buck and to make him think, I'm here all the time. When did I miss this deer? This big dominant deer is in here, and he created a scrape right on my scrape line. Like, I'm not taking that. And that, I feel, drives bucks, dominant bucks particularly, absolutely crazy. And then you're forcing them to psychologically alter the course of their day, so they're coming back to their scrape line to check it more often, and that's when you can kill them.
Correct. And so, that's on the territorial scrapes.
Yeah. Yep. And so a dominance or a challenge scrape is one of those smaller auxiliary scrapes that's trying to either take over a territorial or line scrape, or is made out in the middle of a woods when bucks collide into one another and they're trying to assert their dominance visually to one another. So if you know the difference between those three, like I said, we like to hang our cameras on a lot of community scrapes just because we're gathering a lot of data. And we like to kill does too. Don't get us wrong. We set these up and we try to kill, 2 to 3 does a year to fill the freezer and do that sort of thing. But our scrape line scrapes that we're using to, upset these deer, they are smaller in size, but we'll take the scent that we use in one of those challenging scrapes on their scrape line that's existing, and we will sprinkle it on the adjacent couple of scrapes to make them think like, all right, not only did this deer come in here and make his own scrape, how dare he, but he also pissed in mine here and here. Now I'm really pissed. Now I'm going to come back even more frequently to check them. And so we're psychologically manipulating the deer into thinking there's some kind of dominant ghost buck in there that he's got to go in and check on, and it tends to work really, really well in like the last 2 weeks of October and into like that first 3 or 4 day period in November.
Yes, absolutely. And, just to reiterate, because we want to drive this home, the community scrapes, you've seen them. They're large. They're too big to miss.
Sometimes they're the size of a car hood.
Quite literally. Yeah. And I really like that you said that sometimes don't confuse a scrape line with a community scrape when you have maybe that low-hanging mulberry tree on the edge of a field and there's like 3 big scrapes that almost mold into one but don't. Like that to me is going to be more of a community scrape, and that can be dependent, but I'm thinking, I'm talking like there's about 6, 8, 12 inches of grass in between those. That's more of a community scrape. When you get into the territorial scrapes, those scrape lines that you talked about, that's where you find a scrape around the field edge every 20 yards, 30 yards, because that buck's going, checking his scrape, going down a little bit, checking his scrape, going down a little bit, checking his scrape. And those are going to be your territorial scrapes. Those are very important in targeting specific deer. And then, like you said, the challenge scrapes, your dominant scrapes, challenge scrape is going to be next to a territorial scrape. And the dominant scrape is, just like you said, it's a buck who's just, he's trying to look big and bad and tough, and maybe he's showing off for ladies, or it's a 3-year-old that's like trying to just talk himself into rutting, and he's just going to paw the ground up for a little bit to act tough, kind of like a bull does in a group of cows. Hey, look at me, I'm bad. Like, he's probably not going to come and revisit that scrape. So don't take a lot of investment in there. The scrapes that are exposed soil and that that a deer has taken some time to invest in that, those are the ones that you key on.
And oftentimes I feel like year after year you'll have perennial scrape lines. And
especially from the same deer.
Oh yeah. You and I would say 100% of all the theories and things about whitetails out there, we totally believe in the dominant buck theory. We tend to have on our best farm, we tend to house 2 bucks a year, one on the north end, one on the south end, and they typically tend to not cross or mince paths. And we've seen this year after year after year, and time again with bucks. And so when you have those areas and those buck houses, when you remove one of these bucks, we typically tend to find that the mature buck will want the preferable spot on the north side of our farm and start using those scrapes until we get him killed. And he'll fill in the slot at the hotel, like we've talked about in podcast past, with his own scent and his own territory. And he'll take that over.
He decorates his house the way he wants it.
Exactly. And so I feel like once you remove that deer, we believe that there's certain scrapes on every single farm that we hunt that are continually used year after year. And once you find those perennial scrapes, the ones that get used year after year, regardless if the buck year after is dead, gone, lost, got killed by the neighbor, whatever, that those scrapes, there are certain areas in the farm in which it happens year after year. And
those
if you can key in on that and know and earmark that mentally, that you can be even more efficient, because you're done with the legwork of trying to figure out where the edge is, where the scrape line is starting or ending. And so typically we find that these scrape lines occur, especially perennial scrapes, and we're hunting ag country. That's an important distinction here. So if you're somebody that just found our podcast for the first time and you're like a Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania type dude, or even a Southwestern type guy, we're in, agricultural country in Western Illinois, right where it meets Iowa. So typically most of these scrape lines are on field edges or on ridge tops or valleys within the timber. So we also find them within the timber. You and me are both impatient by nature people, and we like to see a lot of deer every time we hunt. So typically we hunt a lot of field edges. But I just wanted to make the distinction that, yes, we can find these within the woods. Lots of times they will be one of our best rut funnels on a different farm. There's a really nice scrape line, and it's adjacent to a creek. It's about 10 yards north of the creek, give or take, and there's one there every single year from a dominant buck or a subordinate buck that's making a scrape in there. So they can be found in the woods as well, but typically it's at a low point, a high point, or on a hard edge like a field edge, or where two habitats collide. So that's where these lines can be found. In terms of when to hunt them, I would say that...
I think that's when you start to incorporate your trail cameras.
Yep.
You can guess on a calendar, or you can really up your guesswork by looking at weather patterns. But we hunt scrapes very, very, very much so in conjunction with the trail camera data that we receive. I would say that over 50% of our cameras are utilized on scrapes.
Yep.
Probably heavier than that,
I would
especially
say that.
Come season. 70%.
I would say virtually almost all of them, unless we're trying to find a random giant or like a satellite buck or something like that. Satellite bull.
So when you have these cameras rocking and rolling and you go, okay, I understand now, you get what we're saying by territory, because you have these several scrapes where you have You might get other pictures of deer, maybe, but you have that one buck who's there. Boom, 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 boom. He's hitting this scrape or these set of scrapes like every night or every other night, or he's a deer that's in here the most. Like that's his turf. And you then know to be able to string this data together to probably guess on where he's bedding. So you take the data from the cameras, you understand what deer you're hunting, number one. Then you understand, okay, I've got an idea or a theory, or maybe you're sure he's bedding on this ridge, in the cedar thicket, in the switchgrass, whatever it is. And then it allows you to predict when he's going to daylight, or if he hasn't already daylighted, right? If you get a picture of a deer that's daylighting on a scrape, it's time to hunt him. But with mobile cameras now and the way that we use them, you can say, oh man, Megatron, he's getting closer to daylight every day. Like I can see that in 5 days we're supposed to have a 15-degree drop in temperature. That's might be just enough to get him to move during the day. That's when you go in to get him. That's how we use him to hunt a deer before he breaks tradition and he goes all over in November, and you really start losing the ability to hunt that deer on his pattern in his home area. Like you said earlier, the last 2 weeks of October, the first couple of days of November, that's when we're hunting these scrapes for a specific deer that we're trying to get under his skin, or we've got under his skin, and we just need him to walk in daylight.
Yep, and we're going to try to do that this season with one such deer. And today, this scrape hunting episode launches on October 3rd. I believe that we are going to have an opportunity within the next 3 weeks at a buck, ideally, that we call Twix, that has used the same scrape line during the same time of day, which is the evening, during the same 2-day window in the end of October every year that we've hunted. And this will be the third year. If he does it, if he does the same thing that he did 2 years ago and last year, I think that we're probably going to run an arrow through him this year, ideally, knock on wood. But that's another thing you can key in on is that historical trail camera data. We talked about this on that podcast that we recorded with Jake in the Exodus podcast. Like, we are constantly storing those pictures and videos into their own subfolders by year. So that way we can go back through and look at the time and date they were there in years before, between 1 and 4 years. And typically there's trend data there to show you when he's going to be there. And I feel like that's the buck that we have on the list this year that's going to be the most predictable for us. So I'm hoping that he does the same thing again and we can shoot him. Ideally.
I agree. And it's crazy, if it happens, I'll be much more of a believer in annual deer data, but there are some guys that think, man, to the hour, this deer is going to do that. I don't know about that, but it is interesting.
I don't know about the hour, but I think there's a couple day window that they
You're
do.
100% right. I think you have like a 72-hour delta of like, man, there's something there, So I don't know. I mean, we've covered on the types of scrapes that we hunt, on how we use them and how we hang them and create them. If you listen to 161, this really pairs well with our tactic of stand hunting. So scrapes pop up during season. They're one of the biggest things that we try to respond to, not react to, respond to them well. If there's a big scrape line that pops up or a big scrape that pops up, we're throwing a camera on it for sure. And then if we realize like, okay, this is a part of the puzzle to a deer we want to hunt, we will then take one of those hang-on stands and move it into an area so that we can predict, right? We're looking ahead at the forecast. We understand what deer's there. Now we know that there's a cold front moving in or a wind change. We're going to hang that stand, leave as little scent as possible, and then go in and kill them when it's right. So, we're trying to pair these together to hopefully let you guys understand the tactics that's running through our minds during season and utilize them. We're trying to launch these a couple weeks before we put them into application. But, scrape hunting is a big deal, but also being able to move your stand to hunt these active scrapes is a big thing too. So, it's one thing to find a scrape, that's awesome, or make a mock scrape, that's awesome. Then understanding to use cameras to collect data, that's the next step. And then being able to put yourself in a position to kill on that scrape is the final thing.
And some of you guys probably already have perennial scrape lines where you're like, I know it's going to be in this ditch every single year, and you have your stand already hung up there. But in a farm where maybe you're a new guest and this is your first, second, third year and you're still figuring things out, if there's a scrape line that pops up, then throw a camera somewhere on the middle of it, create your small dominant scrape and get out of there. See what happens. We do that all the time. We constantly have 2 or 3 cameras in our backpack that are floater cameras that we take, not saying we put an immense amount of pressure, but we do, like, I would say once every weekend, we take a tour and we'll zip around on a side-by-side and we'll just look for sign and we'll see, oh, there's a fresh scrape line right there. That one was not here last weekend. We'll key in on that. We'll make a small scrape. We'll get out of there after hanging a cell cam, and we'll monitor it to see if it's a dominant buck or not. And so I feel like if you use both of those in unison and your camera strategy is locked in and you're observing what's popping up around you, that you can really, really use scrape hunting to your advantage. And I think it's almost just as good as like a food plot or a food source during the late season. Like, I think we've probably honestly killed more deer using some type of scrape hunting tactic than during the late season over a food source.
We've either killed a deer hunting scrapes or been within inches of doing it every year, in
October.
That's what I'm saying.
Yep.
We've had multiple opportunities. We've been in the ball game. Like TJ last year, you would have killed him
had the wind not switched a little bit.
The wind didn't switch a little bit. The wind switched 180 degrees with nothing in the forecast.
Yeah,
it was a complete, incredible, crazy anomaly that was nuts. And, think of the opportunities we've had in October hunting scrapes. Or
you passed Twix last year at 4.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, we've kind of, like you said, figured this out. We're not beating our chest. We're not saying that we're the best at it by any means. But if we can help you, if you can listen to this podcast and you can go, oh, that clicked, right? Or if you can make a mock scrape. And it's really cool when we have listeners or we have followers of the page, the show that like message us. We get them every year. Like, hey guys, I tried it for the first year and I can't tell you how cool it is to get this trail camera video. I've never had deer blow up scrapes. I've never been able to pattern deer. It's just a really cool feeling. So, man, I hope that this helps. And we're going to keep tying these strategies in as a season progresses. Try to give you about a 2-week advancement. We can't predict the weather, but try to give you about 2 weeks to process this information, to use this information, and hopefully capitalize with it. But we're going to wrap this one up now. Do you have would you rathers for this guy?
I do. This is a good one. Would you rather hunt a scrape line or a community scrape during the most preferable time of the year?
I'm gonna.
So like
a
community scrape, maybe in
yeah.
November, like early November, like pre-stage, like bow hunter's best time of the rut, or a mock scrape maybe later in October.
I would rather hunt a scrape line. I think territory scrapes are freaking awesome. And as far as for camera use, you couldn't probably put a camera in a better spot. But the difference to me between hunting a scrape line and a community scrape is that with a scrape line, I'm hunting a deer. Mm-hmm. Community scrape, as you said, like in that 5th through 7th of November, I'm hunting the deer in the area.
A group of,
I like the idea that, man, we're going in to kill this buck. Mm-hmm. If he does the things right, I should be able to draw back and get in the game. Mm-hmm. I dig that stuff. So I'm going to pick the scrape line.
Okay. And then would you rather hunt a scrape line in early October or a food source in late December, early January? Let's say in both cases your target buck is alive.
Sure. Early October, I just don't like it. I don't mean to say that I'm not enthusiastic about deer season coming. Yes, it opens the floodgates, and if the deer is doing things right, you can kill them. If you would have said October, it would change my mindset. But early October has just always been, it's a big risk, big reward. I would rather play my cards right, and if I can hunt that, like you said, that late season and be a little more strategic with it, I'm going to do that. So I would opt to not hunt early October, defray until late season.
Okay. One last thing I was thinking of. I was wondering and trying to think back and remember of all the deer that we've patterned on a scrape line. And I think I know the answer to the question. My question was going to be, do you think we've positioned most of our trail cameras at the end of a scrape line or somewhere in the middle? And I think it's probably in the middle.
I agree, especially our first one. we use these scrape lines to figure out, just as we said, where the deer's bedding. And that's important to like begin to quote unquote cast your web of cameras to figure it out. But I think more than not, we're in the middle somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And more than not, we have seen that there is a habitual nature that deer is coming to the scrape from one side or one part of the farm or one part of the camera. And then you maybe set another camera down the area and you can start to string this data together. Be like, okay, this buck is typically on a northwest wind is working this field edge north to south or whatever he's doing. You know what I mean? And so I would say, though, knee-jerk reaction, if we're hanging a camera on a scrape line, we're throwing it in the middle.
And I would say, just kind of getting back to what you were saying, the problem of a trail camera is you are measuring a 50-foot swath of area. It's not very big. The trigger sensors on those things, it's not like you're getting a snapshot of an entire field in HD or 4K. You can zoom and pivot and do something like if you were on an editing software. You're getting a okay image. You are more than likely, most trail cameras have a fairly advanced sensor, but the problem is if a deer pops out on a 400-yard long field edge and you got one camera on there, well, if it's not used correctly, you're probably going to miss that deer 9 times out of 10. But by putting these over scrape lines, you are basically taking all 5-6 of those data points, the scrapes themselves, and you're condensing them down and forcing the deer by them, regardless if you have your edge feathered or not. And I think that that's an incredible way to put the use of putting a trail camera over a scrape line, is you're taking huge swaths of data, like hundreds of yards long sometimes, and you're condensing them and manipulating a deer in a strategic way to walk right by that one little data point so that you know that, I don't know where he's entering this field or this line, path of travel, but I know he's coming by here. So I feel like it's a really efficient way, is what I'm saying, to maximize a camera. If you're a person that can't afford to throw, 30, 40, 50 trail cameras out, or you don't have that many, that's fine. Put this on a really good spot on a scrape line and get the most use out of your camera in the most efficient way possible. So,
amen. All right, man. Well, we'll catch you on the next one. We've got a couple other good ones here in the hopper, and if the cards play out right, we might be able to have a kill podcast in between some of these. But I think we have these positioned just right so that we should get through these last other tactics and then get into arrow and deer. So we'll catch you on the next one. Don't waste it.